We continue now at the top of Daf Yodalit Amid Beis Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 14b. On the previous summit, the Gemara was discussing Rav Huna's approach to Rabbi Yossi in our Mishnah. Again, Rabbi Yossi in our Mishnah says that by the Shtei HaLechem, for example, if one has a pigul intention for one of the loaves, then only that loaf becomes pigul and not the other loaf. And Rav Huna extended this opinion of Rabbi Yossi that this would be true also in a situation of an animal carbon. Let's say there's a pigul intention on the right thigh of the animal, then only the right thigh would be pigul and not the left thigh. And the Gemara is in the middle of asking on this approach to Rabbi Yossi. The Gemara asks from the Mishnah earlier. The Mishnah earlier says that if one takes the komets of a karban mincha on the condition or with the intention to burn the komets outside of the proper time, to burn the komets tomorrow, so then it becomes pigul. And the Gemara established on the previous Amud what becomes pigul. We must be talking about the shirayim, the remainder of the karban mincha, even though that is a separate entity, mifagli, but it is going to become pigul, and that's even according to Rabbi Yossi. So hacha over here, the chashe behu bezvicha gufa, again, where the thought is in the animal that's being slaughtered for the carbon itself, lo kol shekain. So certainly, again, if the right thigh, the intention is there in terms of the pigul, then it should apply to the left thigh as well, if that's true in the Mishnah by the komets, again, by burning the komets outside the proper time, where the intention is to burn the komets outside of the proper time, that we say the remainder of the karban mincha becomes pigul. Clearly, Rabbi Yossi would not extend his position that far, and so the Gemara continues and says, Elam Rabbi Yochanan, rather Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Yochanan rejects Rav Huna's approach to Rabbi Yossi. Hainu time of Rabbi Yossi. The following is the reason of Rabbi Yossi. Hakosav ason guf echad. The pasuk makes them one entity. Hakosav ason shnei guf, and in the pasuk also makes them two entities. This is referring to the Shtei HaLechem. Guf echad dema'akvi adadi. On the one hand, they're one entity. They are required one of the other. And shnei gufin, but they're also two entities. The Amar Achmana, because the pasuk does say halachuda avida. This one is done on its own. V'halachuda avida, and this one is done on its own. So in a certain sense, they're one entity, and in a certain sense, they are two entities, and therefore we follow the following course of action, or vinu, if the intention combines them, so then misarvin, so then we say they are combined as one. The hakasav ason guf echad, then the pasuk renders them one entity. Palginu, but if the intention is only on one of them, and essentially they are split, then mifalgi, then they are going to be split, the hakasav ason shnei gufin, because the pasuk then considers them to be two entities. And Rashi explains, Elam Rav Yochanan, rather Rav Yochanan says, Lesel Rav Huna. It's not true what Rav Huna says. And within Rav Yosef v'im pigel biyamin, if he has an intention of pigel on the right thigh, pigel b'smol, then there will be pigel on the left thigh. Tahachazinan, because we see afilu lo chishev elabedam, even if his intention is only about the blood, nispagel basar, we see that the meat becomes pigel. V'gabe chalos, and when it comes to the chalos, again, by the Shtei HaLechem, and this is also true by the arrangements of the lechem haponim, hainu time of the Rabbi Yossi, damar b'masnisan, the reason of Rabbi Yossi that he says in the Mishnah, the trei gufi ninu, that they're considered two entities, v'im pigel bazu lo nispagel bazu, and if there's an intention of pigel with this one, the other one is not pigel. Ule'el katani b'shteihen b'kezayis, and then earlier we also learned that by both of them, if he has intention combining them for a kezayis in terms of an intention of pigel, the mashma midamitztarfos techad gufa ninu, there it sounds like the opposite, that they can combine and they're one entity, they're one unit. And the answer is hakasav ason guf echad v'hakasav ason beis guf. And the pasuk does both; it renders them one entity and also two entities. Hakasav ason guf echad dema'akvi hadadi. On the one hand, they're one entity because they're required for one another, meaning de'ein zu kasheira below zu. This one is not kosher without that one. T'chsiv, as it's written in the pasuk, shtayim shnei esronim. That's the pasuk. The mashma shtayim v'lo achas. It's understood you have to have both and not just one. Uchsiv soles tiyen. It also says soles tihiyena. V'chol havoy. Anytime you have a language of tihiyena, like a language of havoya, ikuva, that's a requirement. V'oso kasav atzmo ason shnei gufim. But that same pasuk also renders them two entities. Midachsiv shtayim, because it says two. The mashma dechol achas lishta v'arichosav b'fnei atzma. Each one is needed and prepared on its own. Hilkach arvinu. Therefore, if in a certain sense he combines them, the Amar kezayis bein shteyen, where he says the kezayis coming from both of them, that's how he phrases it. Then misarvin, then he's combined, he's mixed. Umitztarfin, and they combined. The hakasav ason guf echad. Then the pasuk makes them one entity. But palginu, but if he himself splits them, meaning the Yamar al manas lechol menachas, he has that intention to eat one of them outside the proper time. Velo irev chaver ta'ima, he didn't include the other one together with that. Then mefalgi, then they're split. Ve'ein chaver to pigel, the other one is not pigel. Darei hakasav ason shnei gufim, because we also see that they're rendered into two entities. Rashi notes yesh lashonas acherim b'halacha zu avol zu ikar. There are other approaches here, but this is the main approach. And the Gemara continues, Boy Rabbi Yochanan asks the following question, Pigel b'lach metoda mao, if he has an intention of pigel by the lach metoda, that's the breads that accompany a carbon toda, what's the halacha? And b'minchas mafa mao, a similar question by minchas mafa, the baked carbon mincha, what's the halacha? And Rashi explains, Pigel b'lach metoda sheina arboa minim, the lach metoda are 4 different kinds of loaves, upigel be'echad min haminim, let's say has an intention of pigel with one of those kinds, mipligi Rabbi Yossi v'Rabbanan, b'ha, would Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanan argue over here, im nispaglu hachirim, if the others become pickle. Oh, lo, or maybe they don't argue. Mi amrin, and maybe we should say, kevan de zevach echad matir, and since it's one slaughtered animal that permits all of them kechad dami, and then they're all like one unit. Oh, dilmer, maybe kevan de lav chad minu, since it's not all of the same kind. Polig Rabbi Yossi would argue. But minchas mafen, what about a minchas mafe sheyesh ba shnei mina? There are 2 kinds over there. Hey chalos veherikikin, there are 5 loaves and 5 wafers. Kedamar beperakatoda ve'aliba de Rabbi Shimon kanasavlu. This is according to Rabbi Shimon, this question. Again, Mahu, what's the halacha? Miyamar hoel v'kometz echad l'shneim lo polig. Do we say, since it's one kometz for both of them, so therefore, lo polig Rabbi Yossi doesn't argue. V'im pigel b'chalos nisbaglu rekikin, if he has an intention of pigel by the loaves, then the wafers are pigel. O dilmer, maybe, kaven the shnei minin polig, again, since it's 2 separate minim, so therefore he would argue. Again, a similar question over there. And the Gemara continues, Tana le Rav Tachlifa mi Ma'arava, Rav Tachlifa from Ma'arava taught, V'cheinat omer b'lach metoda. The same is true by the lach metoda. V'cheinat omer b'minchas mafen. The same is true by the minchas mafen. Rashi explains, V'cheinat omer d'hachanami polig. That indeed, Rabbi Yossi would argue in these cases as well. And the Gemara continues, Tana Rabbanon, the sages taught in a brisa, b'shas shchita, at the time of slaughtering the carbon, chishav lechol chatzi zayis, he had intention to eat a half a zayis outside the proper time, uv'shas rika, and then at the time of throwing the blood, chishav lechol chatzi zayis, he again had intention to eat a half a zayis outside the proper time, pigul, in that case, it will be pigul, memnei shechito rika mitzdarfen, because the slaughtering and the throwing of the blood do combine. Now, ika diamri, there are those that say shchita uzrika de tarvayu matirin in, shchita and zrika, since they're both permitters of the carbon, yes, they combine. Kabbalah v'holachalo, but let's say receiving of the blood and conveying of the blood, they would not combine. V'ika diamri, but there are those that say hanach demerachkon. These are distant from one another. The shchita is done all the way at the beginning, the zrika is done at the end, and still they combine. So then we could argue v'kol shekein hani demekarvan. Certainly, when it comes to the kabbalah and the holacha, which are right next to each other, certainly they will combine. And Rashi explains, B'shas Shchita, at the time of the slaughtering, Astam Zevach Koy, we're going on general slaughtered carbon. Shchita Uzrika Matira Ninu, Shchita and Zrika are both permitters. Shchita Kidsha Ladam, the Shchita sanctifies the blood. Kedamar Veshili Pirkin, like we say at the end of our parak. V'yamar Hasam Habola Kadesh, Kebola Hatar Dami, we say over there that one that comes to sanctify is like one that comes to permit. Uzrika, and then the throwing of the blood, Materas Habasar, that's what permits the meat. And Kabbalah V'holacha, the receiving and the conveying, the Lav Matira Ninu, the receiving and conveying of the blood, which are not matirin, lo mitzdarfin, they do not combine. The Kabbalah ain't a materes, the ain't a litzorech zrika. Kabbalah is not a matir, it's not a permitter, it's really just being done for the sake of the zrika. And shchita zrika merachki adadu mitzdarfin. Again, the argument that shchita and zrika are distant from one another, but they combine. V'kol shekain Kabbalah v'holacha de mekarvan, and certainly the Kabbalah and the holacha, which are near one another. And the Gemara continues and asks on this brisa, Ini, is this really true? V'atani Levi, but Levi taught, Arba avodos ein mitzdarfos, the 4 avodos of the blood, they do not combine lepigul in terms of pigul. That's shchita, zrika, kabbalah, v'holacha. The 4 avodos are shchita, zrika, kabbalah, and holacha. And so that's to directly contradict the brisa. The brisa clearly said that shchita and zrika do combine. And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Rava says, Lokash, it's not difficult, Ha-Rebbe, Ha-Rabbanan. This is actually a machlokas tanoim between Rebbe and the Rabbanan. Titania, as we learned in a brisa, Hashochet esakeves lechol chatzi zayis mechalazu. If one slaughters the lamb in order to eat a half a zayis from this challah, v'chein chavero, and then the other one lechol chatzi zayis mechalazu, to eat a half a zayis from this challah. Rebbe says, Omer ani, I say shazeh kosher, that in this case it is kosher. In other words, the 2 machshavos, the 2 intentions, do not combine to create a situation of pigul. And Rashi explains, Ein mitzdarfen shtayim mehen biyachad em chishe bazu al chatzi zayis uvazu al chatzi zayis. Again, one cannot combine the avodos of the blood together if he thinks about this one a half a zayis and that a half a zayis. And the Gemara ended up answering, Ha-Rebbe, Ha-Rabbanan. Here we have Rebbe, and here we have the Rabbanan, meaning Ha-Datani ein mitzdarfos. When we say that they do not combine, that brisa that we just brought that says they don't combine, Rebbe, he that is Rebbe, And again, that is because Rebbe in this brayso is saying that when one slaughters one keves to eat a half his eyes from this challah, and then the other keves to eat a half his eyes from that challah, they do not combine, and therefore we are assuming at the moment that the same is true when it comes to the blood avodos. But the Gemara continues, Amar le Abaye, Abaye says back to him, what kind of comparison is this? Amor de shamat le Rebbe, I understand that we hear from Rebbe that chatzi matir v'chatzi achila. He's saying it doesn't combine when you have a half a matir, you have two lambs, each one is a chatzi matir, and then you also have two challahs, that's a chatzi achila. So there we understand, Rebbe says there's no combining. But kulo matir v'chatzi achila, here we have a situation where it's an entire matir and a chatzi achila. Misha madle, do we hear it in that situation? Who says that in that situation they do not combine? Rashi explains, chatzi matir v'chatzi achila. Again here, by the keves, you have half matir, half achila. Kagon keves have a chatzi matir, one lamb of the two is a half a matir. V'lo chishav olav ela b'chatzi achila, and then he had that intention about half an eating, half a zayis. But kulo matir v'chatzi achila, when we're talking about a case of the various avodos of the dam, so that's a kulo matir with half achila. Kagon shchita de kulo matir b'dam, the slaughtering is a full matir of the blood. Uzrika de kulo matir b'basar, and the throwing of the blood, which is a full matir of the meat. Misha matale, do we hear that Rebbe holds dimchisha bazu b'chatzi zayis uvazu b'chatzi zayis dein mitzdarfin? Do we hear that if you had intention in this one for half a zayis and that one for half a zayis, that they don't combine? Who says Rebbe goes that far? But the Gemara continues and says, Amarle Rava bar Rav Chanan li Abaye. Rava bar Rav Chanan said to Abaye, 1 second. V'yisle l'Rebbe kulo mater v'chatzi achila. If Rebbe does hold that by kulo mater and chatzi achila, meaning these cases of combining by the blood avodos, that they do combine and that there is a problem of pigul, so then actually he should have been strict in this case as well. Ligzor chatzi mater v'chatzi achila. He should make a gezerah by the case of chatzi mater and chatzi achila. Atu kulo mater v'chatzi achila, because of this case of kulo mater v'chatzi achila. And so therefore this brayso, the fact that Rebbe says that in the situation of chatzi mater and chatzi achila they don't combine, that sort of does indicate that they don't combine by kulo mater and chatzi achila. To Rabbi Yossi gazer for Rabbanan gazri, because we do find that Rabbi Yossi makes such kinds of gezeras and the Rabbanan make such gezeras. Rabbi Yossi gazer, we find that Rabbi Yossi makes a gezerah like that. The Tanan, as we learned in a Mishnah, lahakter levon to lamacher, let's say he has the intention to burn the levona tomorrow outside the proper time. Rabbi Yossi Omar Pasal Vein Bo Kares. Rabbi Yossi says it's disqualified and there is no kares. V'chachamim omrim pigul v'chayavan ala kares. The chachamim say that it's pigul in such a situation and there is a chi of kares. And what's the reason of Rabbi Yossi? Rabbi Yossi saying that it's not pigul. Apparently there is some kind of gezerah midrabanan over here. We see that he does make a gezerah. For Rabbanan nami gazra, we also find that the Rabbanan make a similar type of gezerah. The Tanan, as we learned in a Mishnah, pigul bekometz v'lo belavona, if he has an intention of pigul by the kometz and not the lavona. Belavona v'lo bekometz, or the other way around, by the lavona, not the kometz. Rebbe Omer pigul v'chayavan alav kares. Rebbe says it's pigul and there's kares. V'chacham omer ein bo kares ad sheyafagel b'chol hamatir. And the chacham say there's no kares unless there's pigul by the entire matir. And so again, the chacham over here are saying there's no kares, but apparently it is disqualified. Apparently there is a gezerah midrabanan. And the Gemara continues, Amar Lei said back to him, Hachi hashta, what kind of comparison are you making? B'shalom Hasam, I understand over there, Gazer Rabbi Yossi kometz de levona, atu kometz de mincha. There Rabbi Yossi makes a gezerah. He says we'll make a gezerah by the kometz of levona because of the kometz of the mincha. And Rabbanon Gazri kometz atu kometz de minchas chote, ulevona atu levona haba bebazichin. And they'll also make a gezerah. The Rabbanon will make a gezerah, this kometz because of the kometz of the minchas chote. By the minchas chote there is no levona. And the levona over here because of the levona that comes in the bazichin where it's really only levona. And kevasim nami keves atu keves chavero. And when it comes to the lambs as well, you can make a gezerah one lamb because of the other lamb. Bezech atu bezech chavero. You can make a gezerah by 1 spoon of levona because of another spoon. Elohacha, but over here, this kind of gezerah, miika chatzi matir v'chatzi achila be'alma, is there such a thing as chatzi matir and chatzi achila in general, to leikum v'ligzar, that we should make such a gezerah? Just because you make a gezerah in the cases above does not mean that Rabbi Yossi would make a gezerah in a situation of chatzi matir and chatzi achila. And the Gemara continues and demonstrates that this really is the reason for the gezerah of the Rabbanon. Hachanami mistabra, the time of the Rabbanon mishum hachiu. It makes sense to say that the reasoning of the Rabbanon is because of this, again, that we're making a gezerah due to similar situations. To Katani Sefer, because it says at the end of the Mishnah, Modim chachamim l'Rabbi Meir, that the chachamim admit to Rabbi Meir, and that whole machlokes we just quoted above between the chachamim and Rabbi Meir, but the chachamim admit, b'minchas chote u minchas kenos, by the mincha of the sinner and the minchas kenos, which is the mincha of the sota. Shem pigel bekometz shepigel, that if there's pigel by the kometz, it is pigel. V'chayovin ole kares, and there is a liability of kares. Shahakometz hu amatir, because there the kometz is the matir. So halamali lemisna klal. What does this need to be taught for at all? Pshit, that seems obvious. Mika matir achrini. There is no other matir in these cases. Why are we mentioning a case where there's only one matir? Of course, that's going to be different than a situation where you have both a kometz and a lavona. Elalav hakamash malon. Rather, isn't it teaching us the time of the kometz mishum diika kometz the minchas chote the damile, that the reason by the kometz why we have this gezer d'Rabbanan is because you have a similar scenario of the kometz of the minchas chote, and since it's similar, there's a reason to make a gezerah. And Rashi explains, Vi islay l'Rebbe kulo mater v'chatzi achila. If Rebbe does hold that by kulo mater and chatzi achila mitzdarf and lepigel we can combine intentions and create pigel, so ligzor chatzi mater v'chatzi achila, he should make a gezerah by chatzi mater and chatzi achila delifsol, that at the very least it should be disqualified. Atu kulo mater v'chatzi achila dekaresu, because of the case of kulo mater and chatzi achila where it's kares. To Rabbi Yossi gozer b'masnisim, because Rabbi Yossi makes such a decree in the Mishnah earlier. B'hakometz as haminchal manas lahaktir levon to lamachar. Person takes the kometz of the mincha in order to burn the levona tomorrow. V'yamar pasel, he says it's disqualified. V'yafagav dein bo pigel, even though it's not pigel. The gazer le'atu pigel, you have a gezerah due to pigel. V'rabbanan nami b'masnisin dekatani pigel b'haktoras kometz. Rabbanan also say that in the Mishnah, in the case of pigel by the burning of the kometz, al manas lechol shirayim lamachar, with the intention to eat the remainder tomorrow. V'lo pigel b'haktoras levona, but there was no pigel by the burning of the levona. Rabbi Meir omer pigel hein hashirayim di islay mefaglin b'shas avodas chatzi mater. Again, Rabbi Meir says it is pigel because he holds mefaglin b'chatzi matir. V'chachamim omrim ein bo kares. The chacham says there's no kares, meaning kares udaleka. There's no kares. Avol pasulu milecho, but it's still disqualified from eating. The gazrina not to kares, because we do make a gezerah due to kares. V'Rebbe omer lael behed yakasher. Rebbe says earlier that it's kosher completely. Kometz de levona atu haktaras kometz de mincha. So then the Gemara said the kometz of the levona, because of the burning of the kometz of a mincha, the damu lahadadi, those are similar. Uve kometz almanas lahakter komsa lamachar moder Rabbi Yossi to pigel hu. And by kometz, of course, we said if he takes the kometz with the intention of burning the kometz the next day, Rabbi Yossi admits that it's pigel. So again, if it's similar, it makes sense to make a gezerah. V'Rabbanan nami the gazri the tifsol mincha b'mechashev v'shirayim b'shas haktaras kometz, and also the Rabbanan that make a gezerah that a mincha should be puzzle by intention by the shirayim at the time of the burning of the kometz, the minchas chote, because you have a case of minchas chote, the hasam avoda shleima hiu mefagelis, there it is the full avoda and it's pigel. And levona nami mechashev v'shirayim b'shas haktaras levona, if he has intention by the levona also on the remainder while he's burning the levona, he has a pigel intention. The hainu time at the pasli Rabbanan lemincha gezerah atu mechashev b'haktaras levona b'bazichin, we can make a gezerah in from the case of burning the levona by bazichin. The hasam pigel gomer, who there again it's for sure pigel shein haktar eli, that's all that's burned. And kevis, you also have the case of the lamb. Da amri Rabbanan b'masnisin, this is talking about again by the shtei halechem. The Rabbanan say in the Mishnah, shachat echad min hakevasim, if he slaughters one of the sheep, lechol beis chalos lamacher, in order to eat the two loaves tomorrow. Hikter echad min habazichin, lechol shnei starim lamacher, he burns one of the spoons of frankincense by the lechem aponim to eat the shnei starim, the two arrangements tomorrow. The kamri Rabbanan ein bo kares, the Rabbanan say no kares hapsolika, but hapsolika there is a disqualification. The gazri chad keves atu keves chavero, again you make a gezerah one lamb because of the other one. Shalo yishchot shneim b'machshava, that he shouldn't slaughter both of them with that intention. The hasam pigel v'chol matir, there certainly would be pigel because it's in the entire matir. V'chein b'bazichin kulo hanach gezeros dika bialma the dami lu have a pigel. You have similar cases. It makes sense to make a gezerah also by the bazichin like that. Aval hacha, but over here b'chatzi matir v'chatzi achila the Rebbe miika chatzi matir v'chatzi achila bialma. Here we're talking about chatzi matir and chatzi achila. Do we find that anywhere else? Pigel, that it's pigel, the nigzer hacha to asam, that we should make such a gezerah. And then the Gemara said that it makes sense mishum ha, makes sense that the Rabbanan are making the gezerah for that reason. The meshachi pigel the damilu, that there's a similar kind of case of pigel. The katani save it the masnisim, because it says at the end of the Mishnah the pigel bekometz velo belavona modim chachamim, that the chacham admit in the following cases shemchisha bekometz o baktoras kometz pigel b'shirayim, that there is going to be pigel in those cases. And again, those were the cases of the minchas chote and the minchas kenos where there's no lavona at all. And so hakamash malon, the time of why are we bringing these obvious cases? It's to teach us that the reasoning to pasli Rabbanan, that the Rabbanan disqualified b'mechashe b'shas haktaras kometz the minchas nedava. If a person has intention during the burning of the kometz by minchas nedava, mishum hachi, it's because of these other similar cases. Deika the minchas chote the damila. You have the case of minchas chote that's similar. Sheim modim shu pigel. There they admit it's pigel, and so you see they're only going to make a gezerah where you have similar analogous cases. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Nitmes achas min hachalos, if one of the loaves becomes tamei, this is talking about the shtei alechem an shavuos, o echad min hastarim, or one of the arrangements of the bread becomes tamei, that's talking about by the lechem aponim. Rabbi Yehuda says, Shneim yatzu lebeis hasreifa, they both have to go, they both have to be burned at the beis hasreifa. Shein karban sibur chalak, it's a communal carbon, it cannot be divided. V'chachamim omer, the chachamim say, hatamei b'tumasu, that which was tamei remains tamei, v'hatar yochel, but the one that's pure, it can be eaten. And Rashi explains, She'ein korban sibor chalak, we don't divide a korban sibor. Hachi maskana de Gemara Talmud Arch befiv shel Rabbi Yehuda, Sheshana me Rabosav. This is the conclusion of the Gemara. Rabbi Yehuda learned from his Rabbeim, She'ein korban sibor chalak, that it's not divided, vim nifsal chatzi, nifsal kulo, and therefore if half is going to be disqualified, the whole thing will be disqualified, according to Rabbi Yehuda. And the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Elazar says, Machlokes lifnei zrika. The whole machlokes in the Mishnah between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim is before the throwing of the blood. Avalei achar zrika, but after the throwing of the blood, divrei hakol, there everybody agrees, even Rabbi Yehuda agrees, hatame betumaso v'hatar yochal, that which is tamei, and that which is tar, it can be eaten. And Rashi explains, lifnei zrika, before the throwing of the blood, nitmes achas min hachalos shel atzeres, if one of the loaves of atzeres of Shavuos becomes tamei, uvelechem aponim, or let's say by the lechem aponim lifnei haktaras bazichin, the equivalent would be before the burning of the frankincense and the spoons. So again, that's where there is a machlokus. Avala achar zrika, but once the blood is thrown, the zrika mal yasu, meaning that the throwing of the blood was done properly. So then divrei hakol, then everybody agrees that which is pure can still be eaten. And the Gemara continues, V'lifnei zrika b'mai pligi, so if they're arguing before zrika, what is the root of the machlokes? Amar Papa says, B'tzitz miratza al achilos kamifligi, they're arguing whether the tzitz can affect acceptance, that's the tzitz of the Kohen Gadol, can that affect acceptance on the achilos, on the eatings, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Tesvav Amud Aleph.